Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the Introduction to Stash webinar. This is the second part of a two-part webinar series focusing on Git software development. The first part of this series, Git With It, is available on our blog and YouTube channel. We're recording this session and we'll submit a link to the recording over the next few days. On the phone today from Precipio Consulting, we have Christopher Pepe. Christopher heads up our Atlassian practice and is the brains behind this webinar. He's been working with the Atlassian products since 2004. I'm Christian Lane, founding partner of Precipio Consulting. I'll be serving as a moderator for this webinar. Let's take care of some quick housekeeping items. Our next webinar, JIRA Agile Primer, will be delivered by Amanda Babb, Scrum Master and Solutions Architect at Precipio Consulting. It's planned for February 5th at 11 a.m. Central. Just a quick note as well, we're hosting a JIRA Service Desk Luncheon in Dallas, January 29th at Hotel Lumen. We're going to talk about the JIRA Service Desk and really how to leverage it and how it can be used to help your business operations. Please register at tinyurl.com/JIRASD. We look forward to seeing you there. Also, as you have questions, please be sure to provide them in the questions utility and the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll queue up the questions and answer them towards the end of the session. So a little more information on Precipio Consulting. We've been Atlassian partner experts for over 5 years and are one of 5 or 6 platinum experts in the country. Close to 100% of our projects are Atlassian related, and we have over 100 clients ranging from 25 to 50-person product companies to Fortune 20 enterprises. The industries that we serve in are pretty wide and vast, and they include technology, automotive, energy, publishing, banking, financing, and insurance, medical and pharmaceuticals, as well as security. We help our clients with process-centric technology solutions that facilitate traditional business process management, IT service management based on ITIL, and of course software development life cycles. In the SDLC space, we're helping clients transition from traditional waterfall to agile. Whatever the widgets are that you produce, we help improve the quality and the throughput at the lowest cost. We support our clients in all facets of the Atlassian product suite and build methodologies and solutions across the entire line of products to help implement those products. We help with best practice advice and guidance, solutions architecting and implementations, licensing, installs, upgrades, maintenance, hosting and managed services, and of course training. Let's send things over to Christopher now.
All right, so welcome to the Introduction to Stash webinar. Stash is Atlassian's enterprise Git repository management tool. It's a on-premise or behind the firewall solution. So it sits within your corporate environment where you can have it as exposed as you want it to be. But it's entirely within your control. The web application, the server that it runs on, and everything else about it. That's opposed to Bitbucket, which is their cloud or on-demand Git hosting solution. So where Bitbucket is similar to GitHub, Stash is similar to GitHub Enterprise, and that it's within your organization. Stash is considerably cheaper than GitHub Enterprise, and there are a number of other differences that set it apart. But today we're not really focusing on how Stash compares to other products, why it's better, or any of those other things. We're really just going to focus on Stash itself and what's so great about the tool. So in many ways, Stash represents everything that Atlassian has ever learned about application design and development and user experience design. It's a very lightweight, very simple application to use. It's a very simple application to administer. There's not a lot of screens. There's not a lot of places to navigate to. The administrative screens are all very straightforward, and they're not complicated to configure. Yet you still have very fine-grained control over permissions, over your repositories and projects, who's allowed to do what, how they actually operate. It's a difficult thing to achieve, and Atlassian has done an exceptional job with Stash to make it such a simple application to administer and to use, but to have such fine-grained control where it's needed. Stash has pull requests and forking and the other features that you'd expect in a Git front end that allows you to have code review and code collaboration capabilities within the tool. Pull requests in Stash can even be configured to require a certain number of approvers before code can be merged. or to require a certain number of successful builds. Similarly, it links to JIRA, Bamboo. You can create application links to the other applications. This gives you traceability across issues. You can see code in Stash that relates to specific issues in JIRA. You can see that within Stash. You'll see it within JIRA as well. And then the marketplace has a number of add-ons to augment and enhance the functionality of Stash. And this is everything from gamification to graphs to receive hooks, pre-receive hooks, post-receive hooks, to notify other systems, to enforce certain workflows. So Stash can really be built out to be exactly the thing that you want it to do. And then because it's a front end that's sitting on top of Git, you have Git and all the things you can do within Git as well that are available to you. So let's take a look at the application itself. Here we see the standard control ribbon that you're used to in all of the Atlassian applications. Across the top, we've got the kind of home button here. When you click on Stash, it'll take you back to this main projects page. We've got projects. So like many of the Atlassian applications, Stash is organized into projects. And then within the projects, we have repositories where all of our code actually lives. So at our high level, we have projects which have different permissions associated with them, and we'll take a look at what's encapsulated by a project. Next, we have repositories. So underneath the repositories are all the different source code repositories that exist within this instance of Stash. And then again, there are more permissions and more things that we can do with repositories as well. So we'll take a look at that. Over here, there is the search box we can use to find a repository and search through Stash the way that we can with all the other tools. There's our help dropdown. If you're an administrator, you have the little administrative gear. There is our work box for notifications, and then our standard user menu that we're used to seeing. Again, in all the applications, they all have the same general look and feel of this control bar. Also on this projects page, there are a number of kind of quick start links. So this will give you information about Stash as well as information about Git to get you up to speed on both of those things. So there's very useful information, and it's worth clicking through and seeing what's in each of these. Little search bar so you can jump around really easily, and then all of the administrative workbox and profile tools that you're used to seeing in all the other Atlassian tools. There's also some getting started information here, both just to get you up to speed on Stash as well as to get you up to speed on Git. So there's some really good information at the end of these links. So I said that everything is organized into projects. And again, this could be analogous to a software product within your organization or some other kind of organizational unit. Within the project itself, you can have one or more repositories. So these are going to be all of your different source code repositories. And each of these is an individual Git repository. So these ones are all blank. So once you create a blank repository within Stash, it gives you a number of different options as to how to actually get your code in here. Git in general is really good about this, about kind of trying to prompt you to, we see you're in this state, you might want to do one of these things. This is probably what you're looking for. So Stash kind of continues along with that vein of, if you're starting with an existing repository, is it already controlled by Git? Is it somewhere else? Here are the commands you need to run in order to get your code into Stash. Let's go back and look at this other project that I have set up, though. So at the project level, there are a handful of settings. You can also set them at the repository level as well, which we'll see. So this will allow you to set permissions for the entire project, and then if you have a particular repository that you want to either further refine the permissions on or open it up more, you can do that at the repository level as well. Otherwise, all the repositories will inherit the project's permissions. There are 3 roles within Stash: administrator, write, and read permission. So if you have write permission, it's implicit that you have read permission. And you can set permissions at the user and at the group level. So this allows you to set up your basic permission structure. There's also public access, which just allow anonymous users to be able to browse the source code. I don't have access keys set up in here, but we'll see when we look at how you actually clone a repository. that if you add SSH keys in as well, then your developers can operate over SSH as well as HTTP or HTTPS if you want to operate over SSL. There's some advantages and disadvantages to each of those things as well. Back within the project, I've got an individual repository here. This is what the repository browser looks like. It's going to list out all the different codes. So here you can see this was a subversion repository that I poorly migrated over to Git. So we've got tags and trunk that are showing up. This is the master branch. We can go look at all the other different branches as well. So starting to work towards Git flow, I created a development branch. So we would do all of our development against that development branch. We might even have a release branch, which we would merge to before merging to master. One of those would ultimately be our actual release when we push out our code. There are tags as well. I don't have any tags currently in here, but the way the tags work in Git is they're just an easy way to remember a specific commit or specific point in time. So by jumping between different branches, we can see all the code could possibly change. So here on the development branch, I've started reorganizing things so that we can backport all of those tags that we had and have just our code base sit here so we don't have to go down into trunk, start to get rid of some of that subversion stuff. My little ellipsis toolbar here allows me to perform some Git operations without having to actually go into the command line. We're actually going to go through an exercise today where we're going to make code changes, we're going to commit them back into the repository and merge them, all without ever touching our IDE or ever leaving stash. So here I can go check this branch out, or I can create a new branch from here as well. If we go over and look at the commits against this branch, because this is a clone of the master branch, it's going to have all of my historical subversion commits that were migrated over when we did the migration. Here are a couple of pull requests being merged in. So you can see all the different commit history, who actually made them. There are additional add-ons that you can use with Stash that will actually draw charts and give you more visual information about the lifecycle of your code repository as well. When we go and look at the branches, this is showing us for all the different branches in our repository, where are they in relationship to each other. So we have master set as our default branch, and we can see that it's one commit behind our development branch. Again, since we're driving towards Git flow, we would have a number of different branches here. We may have a bunch of feature branches and hotfix branches that are active. We would have a development branch, a release branch, and potentially a few others in there as well. This is actually from a plugin, so I'm going to skip over that. We're going to talk more about pull requests as well. Before we get to that, I wanted to show you the settings that are available within the repository. So if you remember at the project level, we had a few things like there was the audit log and there were a couple of other things. The permissions that we could set allowed us to pick users and groups as administrators, read-write permission, or just read permission. Here we have the ability to actually go through and change our repository name, which is going to change the Git URL. So all of your developers would have to modify their settings if you actually go in and change the repository name, but you can do that. Where it physically is on the disk, if you needed to go get it for some reason, how big it is, you can change the default branch so that when you go and view things in Git, it'll jump to a different branch by default. And you can allow or disallow forking. So forking is another way of collaborating and adds an extra layer of separation between your main repository and the repositories that other people are working on. There are a number of hooks that are available. So these two come by default. There are a bunch of them that are available on the marketplace to allow you to do all sorts of other things, like require a JIRA issue to be in a commit before it can be before it can be pushed to a stash. Because Git repositories are all their own standalone repository, you have less control over what developers do with their local repositories on their workstation. But in order for them to get their work back up into Stash, which is usually your authoritative source, all of these pre-receive hooks are going to have to be honored. So you still have pre-commit hooks and all of those other things, but they have to be installed directly on the developers' workstations, and because of that, they have control over them. So it's a little less. It gives you a little less control to enforce your process down on the developers' workstations, whereas you have full control here at the Stash level. So pre-receive hooks do a similar thing. They check the push that's being pushed up to stash and validate that all the changes that were made meet all of your rules. So here this says that you're not allowed to use the force command. If you have something in your push that Git doesn't like, you're going to have to correct that before you're allowed to push it. Notice that we have this disabled, so you could use force push on this repository right now. So pre-receive hooks allow you to enforce your process, whereas post-receive hooks are usually used to notify external systems or perform some other sort of external update, kind of like webhooks, the way that they work in JIRA. After a push has been successfully merged into the repository, then the post-receive hooks are going to fire. So in this case, a hip chat room is going to be notified that that this push was successful. Around pull requests, I think we touched on this briefly last time, but there are some rules. So right now we don't have any rules. Pull requests just exist. You can create them, and then anyone that has permission to can go and approve a pull request and merge that code. You can require a certain number of approvers. You can require a certain number of successful builds before a pull request can be merged. Combined with the permissions, this is also one of those places where you can enforce more process. So if you have protected branches, master or release branch where you're actually shipping code to customers, you can start to build more and more process around how code is actually approved to be put into shippable code. So development branches, feature branches, we don't care what you do. Anyone can create them, make whatever changes you want, but you have to create a pull request and it has to go through some review and approval process before it's allowed to be merged. Branching model is a really interesting new feature. So if you're already using Stash and you're not using the newest versions, you may not have this feature yet. This allows you to define what your Git workflow looks like. So Git flow has a specific structure to it, but most people are using either some subset of that or some other kind of variation of it. So this allows you to define exactly what are your different branches. So here we have bug fix branches, feature branches, hot fixes, and releases. You can use some or all of these, and then by using these name prefixes, it makes it very easy for us to wrap additional permissions around these. So bug fixes and hot fixes and feature branches, maybe anyone can use these two, and only certain developers can create hot fixes, and only particular release managers are allowed to control the release branch. So by using these name prefixes, that ensures that whenever someone creates one of these branches, that they're going to follow the rules that we've put in place. There's also some automatic merging capabilities. So if your software product is such that rather than releasing something as a point in time the way Atlassian does, this is JIRA 4.1, and it's never going to change. It's always going to be JIRA 4.1. If we change the code, then that's JIRA 4.1.1. If instead you maintain multiple releases or if you backport bug fixes to historical versions of your application, then this automatic merge feature is really nice. So it will cascade those merges across all the different release branches that are downstream from the one you merge to. So that'll allow you to take all of those bug fixes and push them into all of your historical versions as well. I didn't touch on the audit log before, but just to show you, it's this kind of little JSON blob here that tells you who made a change, what they changed, and when it happened. So this allows you to get a little bit more information as to what's actually going on in your repositories. Access keys, again, just SSH keys for this specific repository. And then permissions for this specific repository. So again, we can override the permissions that are set at the project level down at the repository level. So if you have third-party contractors or some other group like that that should have only limited access to particular things, you can set your project permissions so that only internal developers have access. And then in an individual repository or even on an individual branch of an individual repository, you can say this group of third-party contractors is allowed to access this bit of code. And then down here in the branching permissions, we have a handful of different rules that are set up. So here you can see I've got my bug fix and my feature branches. So anything that starts with bug fix or feature, then any Stash user is allowed to create those and modify them. In order to modify the master branch, you need to be a release manager. And in order to modify the development branch, you need to be a developer for this specific project. So this permission scheme says that anyone is allowed to go and propose changes to, if you find a bug in JIRA, you can just go create a bug fix branch or a feature branch, go implement your code and create a pull request, and we may or may not pull it into development, and then we'll be off and running with that. So anyone's allowed to do that, but in order to actually get code into the development branch, which all the developers use, then you need to actually be on this project. And in order to release, you actually need to be a release manager. So again, you can create any sort of permission scheme that you want to. This is just one example from what we see out there a lot. To create a new branch permission, you're just going to select a specific branch and then add users and groups to it that'll have control of that branch. Underneath advanced, you can use wildcards and create patterns. That allows me to do things like bug fix star, so any bug fix anyone can modify that branch. So that means future branches that we'll create will also have these rules applied to them. All right, so we've looked through a lot of the basic user interface pieces of Stash. We've looked through a bit of the administrative pieces. There's a couple more things I want to touch on, and then we're going to walk through an example. First of all, how do you actually get code out of Stash? So once you have a repository that's been created, if I'm a developer and I want to start working on this project, I come up here to the clone button. If you've ever used GitHub or Bitbucket or any other Git user interface, you're probably already familiar with this workflow. SourceTree is a really cool application. It's free that Atlassian makes. It gives you a lot of visualization as to what's going on in your repository, and it abstracts a lot of the complexities of how Git works for you. So SourceTree can be a powerful combination with whatever your Git repository management tool is, whether it's Stash or not. But Stash has a little bit more integration directly into SourceTree. So there's a lot of places where you can clone directly to it. Otherwise, you grab this URL here. Again, if we were running over SSL, then this would be HTTPS. And if we were using SSH keys, then I would have the option to change from HTTP to SSH as well. So that gives you an additional layer of encryption. And using SSH keys, then you don't have passwords being stored in files in the disk, which is the drawback of HTTP and HTTPS. But otherwise, you just grab this URL, and then you run the command git clone with this URL, and it will clone this repository on your local workstation. Now you have a fully working copy of this repository with Stash set as the origin. So when you run a git push command, it's going to automatically go to Stash. Of course, you can send it off to a number of different places because it's a Git repository, but by default, it's already set up for you with Stash. What forking does, forking allows you to make a copy of the repository, but it's going to copy it within Stash itself. You'll have an additional copy of this repository within Stash. The workflow is relatively similar, but again, it's just if you need that extra layer of isolation, you can force people to clone a repository, make their changes, and then create a pull request back into your repository. Many development teams will find that branching is really going to suffice. So creating a feature branch, making your changes, and then creating a pull request to get it merged back into the development branch or master or wherever. That workflow works for most teams, and you have the ability to limit it so that only certain people can control whatever branches you want anyway. But again, forking will allow us to create an additional copy of this repository. Fork syncing will allow, so here I now have 2 copies of this repository. You can see I've got all the branches and everything is exactly the same, but I'm actually working on a different copy of it. So if I made code changes and I wanted to push them back to the original authoritative repository, I'd have to create a pull request in order to do that. And from here, other people can fork this and make changes and push them to me, and I can push them back, and you can create as complicated and convoluted a workflows as you want to with Git. But generally, we don't want to do that. So let's go. I haven't actually done a lot of forking in here. So okay, this does show up as a child. All right, so now let's work through a typical bug fix or feature workflow, what that would look like with Stash and how the Atlassian tools are integrated together. So here we have a bug report that test.py, the config file path in this test.py file is wrong. So I'm going to start working on this. And you can see we've got all of our details over here. If I scroll down all the way to the bottom, again, if you're not running the newer versions of JIRA, you may not have this feature yet. So if you have the newest version of JIRA, the newest version of Stash, then what you're going to see is a create branch button within JIRA. So when I click on that, that's going to jump over to Stash and allow me to create a branch. So again, I've got my different branch types that we looked at in the repository setup. In this case, it's a bug fix, but it could easily be a feature branch, hotfix, release, custom. And I may or may not have permission to create all of these things as well. We're going to branch from, we'll branch from development. And it's going to automatically set up the branch name for me as well. Because it's a bug fix branch, it's going to be prefixed with bug fix, and then it's going to have the issue ID and the summary as the branch name itself. So I go and click on create branch. Now again, I could have done all of this stuff from my IDE. I could have pulled all of the latest changes, manually made this branch, changed over to it, and started working there. Workflow is exactly the same. This automates it for you and does it in a consistent way. So this helps abstract a lot of the nuances of Git. So new developers like that because you don't have to learn all these complicated commands. Git has a lot of switches. And then seasoned developers have been working with Git for a really long time, like it because it saves you a lot of keystrokes. So here now I have a new branch that I can start working on my bug fix on. Let's go back to JIRA for a second so that we can remember what we're supposed to be doing. So testpy config file path is wrong. The word connectors was changed to connectors. So let's go find that test.py file first. I hit the letter F. That's a keyboard shortcut for find files. And if I type in test.py, it's going to filter out all of the other files that don't match that query. Just before we move on, just incidentally, if I did CT, in this case it's matching connectors 80 connection, but it will do this smart matching. So it's looking for something that starts with a lowercase c and then runs into an uppercase T, and it's going to return all the files. So there's a number of other shortcuts that you can use and wildcards in this search. It's a really quick, easy way to get around, especially Java applications, which tend to have a lot of nested folders. It's a lot of clicking to drive down to the file you're trying to get to. So here we can see our error. The path is wrong right there. So again, I could do all of this work in my IDE, but instead I installed a plugin in Stash that allows me to edit files in place. So here I'll click on edit. It's going to open up this source file in an editor. This is a really quick, easy way to make simple changes. It's also a good way for managers and other non-devs to still be able to contribute to code. Especially maybe like a README file or a help file or some other thing that they may be responsible for. So here I've gone and made that change. I can also invite other people to collaborate on this individual edit. In this case, we just go ahead and publish it. And you'll notice that what it did was it actually created a branch for that specific edit. And now it's going to do is create a pull request. So I can invite other reviewers and use all the other features that we would use for a normal pull request. But in this case, I don't need to. In this case, we already know that we want to merge this change, so I'm not going to bother going through any reviews, but I could look at the diff. We'd have to actually find test.py and I see what's going on there. Okay, I changed some things around as well in here. But we can look through the diff, we can look through the commits. I know I want to merge this, so I'm just going to do that. And I'm going to tick this box here to delete the source branch after merging. I didn't want to merge it to master though, did I? Oh well, we'll do it anyway. We won't. I'll decline this one. We'll redo it. Sorry about that. So when I made my pull request, I asked it to merge to the wrong branch. I wanted to go to development, not to master. So we'll recreate that pull request, and now we can go and merge this change. And I'm going to delete my source branch. So now in development, this change has been reflected. And I did it wrong again. I was supposed to go to this bug fix, and then we're going to merge. We'll go from development to master instead, since I butchered this so poorly. But here you can see our online edit. So now our file has been corrected in development. So what we want to do is create a pull request. I should have done it from my bug fix branch to development, but eventually we're going to have to go from development to master anyway. So let me now create a pull request from development to master. And again, we know that we want to merge it. Excuse me. And delete the source branch after we merge it. So now I've made a little bit of a mess of my repository, so I'm going to have to go back later. Yeah. So all right, I completely ruined this repository, so that was probably about the worst demo I could have done, but I'm going to chalk it up to being sick. So I left my bug fix branch laying around. I broke master. I broke development. I did all sorts of terrible things. One of the nice things about Git is we can actually go back in time and fix this. The process is more complicated, and I'd have to look up commands. I'm not going to do it right now. But we can actually go back in time and undo all of those changes, and then I'd probably lose all of my merging permissions that I have on all these branches for having broken all of the builds in the first place. All right, so from there, what we would have seen had I actually gone through the process the correct way is we would have seen that our JIRA issue would be related to our branches. We would have traceability from the bug fix branch all the way through development and then eventually to master. As it stands, I don't think we'll see anything in here right now. All right, so that's not set up either, but we would see our code changes in here. So if you're interested, I can reset up that whole test and we can run through that whole exercise again so you can actually see what it looks like. Because I have a super user, I was able to go through and make a bunch of mistakes that I shouldn't have been able to use, but as developers, people can be locked down a little bit more so they can't make quite all of those changes. We can go back and look through our old commits. Let's see if we still have. Yeah. Oh, I deleted my development branch too. That was awfully smart of me. So we still have all of our main branches here. All of our code is still in workable state, so we could probably recover from this simply by creating a branch from here. We'll make it. So now I've got my development branch back, and life can continue. Our permissions should still be set on it. So now everybody can continue developing the way they were before. So you can see that from within Stash, we have a lot of ability to control our repositories. We have a nice integration between JIRA and Stash, so that from JIRA we can create branches automatically. When we merge branches together, we can delete them. So that's important for feature branches and bug fixes and things like that, that you want to branch them so the development can take place in an isolated place, but you don't really need to keep them around once you have finished development on them. So with Stash, you can create very complicated workflows or very simplified workflows. You can have very fine-grained permission schemes, or you can have very broad permission schemes. And all of it is very straightforward and very simple to do. On the administrative side, it's only one page. This is everything there is to administer it, and it's very straightforward to do. So in a lot of ways, it's much easier to administer than even other Atlassian applications are. And If you've ever administered any other Atlassian application, you'll feel right at home in here. It's very easy to navigate around. So with that, I would actually like to open it up to questions. And I don't see any typed. Christian, do we have any questions?
So
Can you talk about the crowd integration? So if we talk about crowd integration, let's actually jump back over into Stash. So underneath user directories, now you can see I have Stash hooked up to JIRA, this JIRA instance over here that we're using in this demonstration. JIRA has a kind of an embedded version of Crowd, or a small version of Crowd embedded in it. So you can see the connector type shows up as Atlassian Crowd. But if you wanted to integrate Stash into Atlassian Crowd, you would do that simply by creating another user directory. It works the same way as creating a user directory in any of the other applications. I don't have a Crowd server running that I can actually run through this, but you're just going to give it a URL, application name, and password. So within Crowd, you're going to create an application name, probably Stash, and give it a password so that this instance of Stash can authenticate to it and do all the other controls you can do from within Crowd. Permissions are going to be read-only, so it's going to be driven entirely from Crowd. You can't modify things within Stash. And you can do incremental synchronization and nested groups. So it's a relatively simple user directory to set up. There's not a lot of options, but it's very straightforward.
Thanks, Chris. We got another question from George. We're thinking of making Stash an enterprise solution for a large company. Will it scale?
Yeah, so there's actually numbers out there that Atlassian has published. They spent a lot of time profiling and load testing Stash. There are really good equations that basically do all of your server sizing for you. So the things that are really expensive are like cloning repositories. That takes up a lot of memory. There's a very specific memory curve that Git uses in cloning operations. So you need to know the number of clone operations you expect to have happen concurrently and a couple of other metrics, but then you just plug them into this formula. It tells you this is how much RAM you need, this is how much disk space you need, this is how big of a CPU you need. Stash is made as an enterprise Git solution. It is designed to scale. Currently, like all the other Atlassian applications, it doesn't have any clustering or high availability solution that's available for it. But it does scale very well as a single instance. I haven't looked into if there's any kind of unofficial, unsupported clustering or high availability work that we can do. It would certainly support cold standby the way the other applications do. But as it is as a single application, it is designed to scale and is made for enterprise. And I'd feel comfortable going to even the largest clients and implementing Stash.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Another question here from Bill. To manipulate the branching, etc., is that admin or write permission on the repository?
So within the branch permissions, let's jump over to our settings and branch permissions. This is going to be write permissions. I don't believe that this gives you admin permissions. So if you have read permission to the project, you're going to have read permission to the repository. And this is really just controlling your ability to write back to these branches. So merging or committing.
Okay. And then the next question is from Eric. Any time frame on federated model support?
Right. So there's no official word on federation or kind of traditional high availability stuff for any of the Atlassian products. I know it's something that they've been secretly kicking around for a long time. I have no idea what their current state is or how actively they're working on it. And Atlassian is driving very hard into the enterprise space. So I would have to assume that, all of those solutions can't be too far off, but we don't have any word on it, and I certainly don't have any official timeline for it. Because The Atlassian applications all support application links. Federating is a lot easier than, say, trying to put in like a true high availability multiple node solution. So we can create links between JIRA and multiple stashes and multiple JIRAs and all of those things, and those give you certain levels of integration. I don't know what a stash to stash application link would allow us to be able to see or do, but I'm fairly certain that we can create one. So there's no real official timeline on it. There certainly is some things that we can do for scaling horizontally if a single instance wasn't actually meeting your needs. But again, we can really, servers are pretty big these days, and Git tends to level out pretty quickly in terms of disk space and memory usage. So you can calculate all of those things out. I guess not so much disk space because every cloning operation is going to use up disk space, but the memory utilization eventually hits a plateau, and there's formulas that describe those things, so we can very accurately size servers to meet needs.
Hey Chris, I was going to add, I know that there is a program for enterprise level type stuff that Atlassian is working on. Eric, I've got your contact info. I'll shoot you a note to see if you have any interest in participating in something like that. I don't know if it's stash specific, but they're working on something that we can probably get you involved with. So we'll reach out to you on that as well. Thanks, Chris. Next question from George. Are there some basic plugin? I'm sorry. Are there some basic plugins every stash instance admin should install to have happy users?
Oh, that's a good one. Let's go take a quick look at. There's one that I really like that I installed in our instance that draws really pretty charts. So I really like that one a lot. The Stash marketplace is ever growing, and there are a lot of kind of fun, new, exciting add-ons that are always being added. I think it depends on exactly what you're trying to do. Like if you want, there's a really neat gamification one. If that's something that your company, if you want people to be able to win badges and stuff like that for committing more often, there are those kind of fun add-ons. A lot of the ones that we end up using are pre-receive hooks to enforce some sort of process to ensure the developers are going through the right steps and don't butcher things the way I did in the demo there. I don't offhand know of a specific one that I would say you have to have this, otherwise there's no point in having Stash. But if you're migrating from Subversion to Git, so if you're one of those kind of newly migrating, this SVN mirror add-on is actually a very useful one for that process, because the Subversion to Git migration is if you do it the way that Atlassian did it, which is a really nice workflow, all of your developers stay in Subversion. You migrate everything to Git, and you start running tests off of Git. So everything that gets pushed to Subversion then gets pushed to Git. Eventually, you migrate people over. So this allows you to keep Subversion repositories in sync with Git repositories. Also, if you're just going to keep legacy Subversion repositories around, it's also useful for that. This Awesome Graphs, this is the one that I installed. There's now a pay version of it too. I installed the free version, which is really cool. The pay version has a lot more visualization in it, but one of the things that Stash doesn't do, and Atlassian has specifically chosen not to, is draw the kind of standard branching charts and stuff like that you see in GitHub and Bitbucket and SourceTree. So Awesome Graphs will give you some of those other visualizations and being able to tell which developers are contributing the most and when they're contributing and stuff like that.
Great. Thanks, Chris. That's all the questions we have.
Well, thanks everybody for attending.
So just a reminder to close this out. We look forward to the next webinar, the JIRA Agile Primer. Will be brought by Amanda Babb, a Scrum Master and Solutions Architect here at Pacific Consulting. That's for February 5th, 11 a.m. Central. In addition to that, as I mentioned before, I shared the URL of the link to the registration forms for the JIRA Service Desk in Dallas. So if you're up in the Dallas area, we'd love to see you out there January 29th. Otherwise, thanks very much for attending. We'll send a link to the recording here in the next few days, likely sometime next week. Please contact us if you have any questions or need some help with something. We'd love to help everyone out. We're at contact@precipia.com. And again, look forward to visiting with you again at the JIRA Agile Primer, February 5th. Thanks so much. Take care.